I am currently wearing a t-shirt that says Eskrima on it. How many of us have a sneaky tap out or Under Armour or a jiu-jitsu t-shirt or something that we wear? We wear uniforms when we train. We wear certain types of clothing. Dr. Peter Katz has researched these aspects of martial arts culture, and he has some very strong arguments about the status of such clothing. Peter, how are you doing?
Doing pretty well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to talking to you about this because we met last year at the conference in California, and I listened to your paper, which was all about martial arts and clothing, all the way from Bartitsu in the 19th century through to hoodies and tap-out clothing and all that branding that we have today. So where should we begin? Let's begin with, what is your argument about this kind of outside of the dojo clothing, the stuff that we might choose to wear on a daily basis?
Yeah, the core of my argument sort of rests on this thing that I claim about everything when it comes to literature and culture, that it really has a lot less to do with semiotics and more to do with affect, or like a really short definition of that is how my body encounters other bodies. So wearing an Eskrima shirt, sorry for the dog, I guess.
That's okay.
Not my dog.
It's not too loud. It's not too loud.
Okay.
Let's just go. Let's just keep going.
Wearing an Eskrima shirt, the semiotics of it says, like, I know what Eskrima is, possibly, although everybody knows someone who has a tattoo on their arm of something in Japanese or Chinese that doesn't read Japanese or Chinese, so who knows, right? But more importantly, I think it sort of shapes your body, that it announces to yourself, most importantly, like, I am a person who can hit you with a stick in ways that you cannot think about. And so that changes the way that you carry your body, consciously or unconsciously.
So the first stage when you start your new martial art, or you really love the UFC and you buy the clothing, is that it's a message to you about you, so you feel something when you put it on. It's affective rather than signifying. It's about like an emotion. It's going to have an effect on your body, on your feeling and your thinking and your interacting.
Yeah, and even the motive for that. So affect comes straight out of Sylvan Tompkins, and he says affects are motivators. So the motivation for buying your like black belt gear the moment you get your black belt is not to like tell everyone you have a black belt, but because you're really excited, right? It's that joy about like, I am a black belt now. I can wear this thing that says black belt.
Yeah. So I mean, I've studied lots of different martial arts at different times of my life, and I think I have always had at least one item of clothing that I've worn for the feeling that it gives me, but also I think because I know that it sends out a semiotic message. I know that it says something to other people about me. And I know that I want that to be said. So even when I was a teenager, I used to lift a lot of weights, and I used to wear World Gym clothing. I wanted to wear Gold's Gym stuff, but it was, I think, Arnold Schwarzenegger trained at World Gym or something like that. Yeah. There's a reason why I couldn't, even though like California was the furthest place away in the whole world, but I still had to wear that. And then I did Taekwondo at university, and I used to proudly wear Leeds University Taekwondo Club. And I think I like your argument about the feeling, but I think the semiotic aspect of it, like sending a message, making a statement, you're putting up a flag, aren't you, and saying this is me. It might be watch out. It might be watch out. I'm tough or something, but it's something that you're proud of and excited by, but you want to send the message out.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, as with any academic argument, it's really fun to be like, no, it's entirely affect. There's no semiotics, so that we get pushed back, right? But in reality, it's probably a dialectic between those two, and it probably varies from person to person. I know I'm somebody who really sort of like thinks with their body, right? I move affect first, and then I'm like, what's the message I'm sending? Which is sometimes great and sometimes gets me into trouble. But even if your initial motivation, it's really interesting to hear you say you had like this particular gym you wanted to announce to people, like, I affiliate myself here. So that, like, that's pure semiotics, right? But then it's also deeply tied to, like, you want to show off your muscles, and you want to think about that for yourself and for other people who will read like Gold's Gym on your shirt and then immediately like check you out, right? Because when I see somebody wearing a shirt that says whatever their martial art is, I'm immediately sort of like, do you carry yourself like someone I think would do that martial art?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, when we were talking after your paper in Orange last year in the conference, I thought, yeah, if I see someone wearing a tap out, I mean, tap out's incredibly popular in the UK, and then a lot of martial artists, but not just martial artists, seem to wear the Under Armour gear as well. But I think that's a little bit more generic. That's a bit more like, I'm a really active physical person rather than necessarily martial arts. But you know, as I said to you, when I see someone wearing tap out gear, I tend to think that they might be likely to attack me with, like, they might go for a double leg takedown or something, rather than to punch me. I mean, so it changes the way that we read people, doesn't it? We might judge them. I noticed that I don't own, even though probably my main martial art, that if it's a martial art, the thing I've practiced longest and most often and every day of my life, just about, is Tai Chi. But I don't have any Tai Chi clothing.
Interesting.
I mean, I do. I have Tai Chi uniforms that people have given me and stuff, but I won't wear them. I won't wear them because it sends out, semiotically, it says, look at me, I'm a white British guy wearing like, wearing silk pajamas or something.
Right,
I just won't do that. Because for me, it's, there is the affective, but there's also the semiotic. What about uniforms themselves? What do you think about the wearing of a uniform in a martial arts lesson?
So I'm interested in your sense, like, you won't wear your Tai Chi uniform because it's just a white British dude wearing silk pajamas, right? And I think I said in the paper, or around my paper presentation, like, nobody in any dojo or dojang or school where I have trained and said this has received it well, but I've always been like, isn't this all just a little bit cosplay, right? Like, there are certainly practical elements to the uniform, and we'll talk about like how that affects your body as well too, but like a significant part of Aikido especially is like, let's all wear hakama and speak in our terribly accented Japanese to each other and bow, and it's all kind of cosplay, which is great. And not to, I think people respond really hostily to that because it suggests, and therefore fake, or therefore not useful. But I think it's also, I quite like the Aikido culture and the fact that when you come in there, no matter who you are, there's that kind of like, we're gonna act calmly and pretend like we're sort of pseudo samurai, and there are certainly some colonial implications there, but at least everyone's being nice. Have you ever tried practicing, because I know you do a lot of different martial arts, right? And I practice several others also. Have you ever tried doing one kind of martial art in the uniform of another martial art?
Yeah, and yes, I have. And it's an interesting situation. I think sometimes if there is cross-dressing involved, which there is, I mean, I've thought a lot about the cross-dressing dimension as well. I mean, it's interesting to recast cultural appropriation arguments, especially in North America, in the US, the cultural appropriation things, that seems to be the hotbed. That's the center of culture. And it seems like you have to be really careful about what you wear, or or the affectation you pick up from another culture. It seems close to apartheid sometimes, viewing it from over here. It's like, wow, you really can't do that if you're white, because it's cultural. And it's like, really? Whereas in Britain, people sort of don't seem to care about it. It's differently organized kind of field. But in a martial art, like, as you say, you walk in and you put on your Japanese-esque clothes or your Chinese-esque clothes. And I have sometimes, I've been down kickboxing. Sometimes when I would go to kickboxing, I'll wear my no-gi Brazilian jiu-jitsu stuff. And it's great, because and I've noticed that it scares people, because they go, shit. So you can kick and punch, and they don't know that I'm absolutely terrible. Like, I'm a little baby crawling around when it comes to jiu-jitsu. But yeah, I do often kind of cross-dress in that sense? Do
Yeah,
Tai Chi in a jiu-jitsu t-shirt or something
yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Why do you ask?
That's I really like that semiotic dimension of it, that people are reading, oh, he's wearing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu uniform.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that. Because for me, my primary martial art is American Kempo or Parker Kempo. And I really specifically don't call it Kempo Karate, which was, here's your like Kempo history lesson if you don't know.
Yeah.
That was a sort of like marketing move that he made much later, at Parker made much later in the system. And it had a lot to just do with the sort of popularity of karate. You would say Kempo, people would say, I have no idea what that is. And you would say karate and they'd be like, oh yeah, Karate Kid, etc. So,
Yeah.
so that was all advertising, and really like its roots, especially sort of midway through its development, are in Kung Fu. He worked with a lot of people in San Francisco. His instructor was also Chinese. So so the system itself then sort of starts very Japanese. He trains with James Matosi. So the system itself begins Japanese, kind of hard style, linear movements, a lot of powerful but not, one body mechanic per strike is how I think of it, Japanese. So Shotokan-esque, which is another thing I practice. But then the later forms are much more fluid, much more how I think of Kung Fu, soft style kind of motions. So when I want to practice, say, an earlier form in the system that feels more Japanese, if I'm wearing my white gi that I wear for a Shotokan, I feel like I do it much more Japanese hard style. And if I wear my black gi, which is very Kempo, for my Shotokan forms, I feel myself doing Kempo things. Now, some of that is probably intentional, but I also have this like really rooted in my body sense that like once I'm wearing a certain kind of uniform, it's like time to be in that body mode, right? So there's like the psychological dimension of you wouldn't go lift weights in your suit that you teach in, maybe, right? And part of that is physical, which we'll talk about in a second, but part of that's also just psychological, right? You want to get in the weightlifting mode, right? You want to get in the exercise mode, so you want to get in the hard style Shotokan mode. You put on your clean white gi with no patches, and you want to get in your Kempo Kung Fu mode. You put on your black gi, or even your sort of more Tai Chi-esque style uniform.
Yeah, I noticed that when so when I used to go to eskrima classes, the classes were at an incredibly inconvenient time. They almost like they deliberately put them at the worst possible time, like Sunday evening. Right. And like Thursday evening, which was marginally better, but so late, like it finished when you wanted to be in bed, and never mind come home and have a shower. And anyway, so it was very difficult to motivate yourself to go, especially in summer when it's a Sunday afternoon, to go training. So I found that I would go down, I used to keep all my gear, I still do, keep all my gear in the shed, sticks and gloves. And obviously you're in a huge kit bag and it all really stinks because you never wash it.
Yeah. Oh no.
But going down the shed, I'd look at it. I'd look at it and I'd like pick up the sticks and smell the gloves, and then you kind of go, yeah, actually, yeah, I do. So there's a ritualistic, but also there was a bodily response. Like my body's going, you go and training now, and you like it, and you're like. Yeah, it's a very physical kind of response when you encounter the smells and the feeling of certain materials, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think affect theory has a lot of different branches off of it, and there's the sort of like Deleuze versus Tompkins split.
Okay.
And for me, the key difference between those is that Deleuze is very philosophical. So if you read somebody who's talking about affect in beautiful language that makes all of the sense while you're reading it, and then when you're done, you're like, but what does that actually mean? That's a sort of Deleuzian affect, and I can definitely go there. But what I really like about Tompkins is that he says, like, no, we're talking biology, physiology. When you're smelling, it's not just like an idea, right? It's physiological, chemical, neurochemical, endocrinological changes in your body that create that kind of feeling. So I think that's really interesting that the smell does it for you too. Because I remember I was teaching 30, 40 hours a week when I was in high school at my Kempo dojo. And then I went away to college and came back, and I walked into the dojo and smelled. And first of all, I was like, oh, it really smells in here, right? I had gotten to the point where I had no idea what that smell was. But then immediately my body was like, and that smells like training. It smells like home.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Also, we really should clean this place.
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine is used to do a lot of mountain climbing, not the mountain climb, bouldering, where they just go round problems and stuff.
Yeah.
And when he used to talk, if you talked about it, his sort of the ends of his fingers would start to sweat.
Oh, wow.
Because he was like almost like salivating from his hands.
Yeah.
Were almost like turning to Spider-Man, like ready to climb. It was amazing. It's like, but
that's really fascinating. And to think about what's happening in terms of parasympathetic and sympathetic responses there, right? You're saying bouldering, his body goes, all right, let's go. Like, let's get, we did this experiment in, your standard high school anatomy physiology class where we took our heart rate and then exercise and took our heart rate, et cetera. And instead of running around the track, I did kata, and my heart rate jumped immediately to like, I forget what the number was, 160, 170, stayed there. And as soon as I finished, kind of dropped back off. And that sounds like finger sweat, right? Like my body was like, okay, it's kata time. Like we know exactly what we need physiologically for that.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing, I don't know if you've looked into, if you're talking about going into these things on a kind of a biological, physical, material, organic level. I mean, what do mirror neurons factor in your research? Because that when they say mirror neurons are so essential to being human, to being able to identify with something else and go, that's like me. So you watch a film and they say that mirror neurons are really involved in the process of like you caring about the hero, or you caring about so like when you're watching an action sequence, or when, like, if I'm watching a fight in a film, it's like my body's like, whoa, we're fighting now. And it's to do with, well, apparently, I mean, I don't do this research in this. I mean, do you get anywhere near that kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's actually like where my research on literature tends to begin. And that's complicated when we're talking about literature and empathy. I think it's there, but it's a lot harder to prove because we're jumping from F5 region, which is more about sort of like, and we're talking, again, capuchin monkeys, talking about like grasping motions. And then we translate that to like, well, it's very close to Broca's region and it's related to, and like birds seem to have one that's related to language. So we can then like jump from grasping to language, which lets us jump to empathy. But if we're talking martial arts, like that kind of grasping motion, I think is much more readily proven, right? That when you see something, your body mirrors it inside, and there's just like, and again, I'm not a neuroscientist, but there's just a very small portion of the energy of your brain dedicated to the like not me part, and it's very small, right? And so, like, to the point that there are some people who have a disorder where they struggle to kind of differentiate between things other bodies are doing in their own body. But I think, in the time of coronavirus, I have watched so many martial arts seminars and videos on YouTube. Highly recommend HD Key. I don't know if we have to pay for it, or they should pay us for the advertising, but they've been doing online seminars and they post them up on YouTube, and there's definitely something about kind of watching a body do a thing and then you feel that back in your body. And I think that can begin even with clothing, right? If I'm going to practice in my house, like you were saying, getting the Eskrima sticks at Sunday night, like it's really easy, as I think we've all learned, when you have infinite time to just not do anything. But if I go get on my Shotokan uniform, I feel like, okay, now I want to see another body like resonate with this. So I bring up HD, and there's now immediately just blanking on all of the sensei's names, right?
See, I mean, speaking of effective responses to things, I mean, since the coronavirus lockdown, I have kind of, although all the things went online free, like all the Gracie Barra stuff that I'm a member of, that all went online for free. There were people sharing Eskrima, Kali. There's Tai Chi galore online now. I kind of just couldn't deal with it. Like
Yeah.
looking at it would made me feel too sad. It made me
Mm.
feel like I was reaching. It was like bereavement,
Yeah.
and it was. And I get emails telling me there's a new episode of this thing that I subscribe to, and I just don't look at any of it anymore. And I guess it's not really a semiotic response; it's an affective response. To me, it's like
Yeah.
a kind of mourning because I genuinely don't know when I'll get back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I still practice Tai Chi, but for me, Tai Chi is something that I need to do, like having a shower. Like if you go a day or two without a shower, you want that more
Yeah.
than anything.
Yeah.
So it's a funny thing because I get filled with immense sadness when I think about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So that's an
Yeah.
effective response, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And really interesting. I mean, there are a lot of other factors with you individually there, but Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like Aikido, is, I think, not a martial art you can practice a lot by yourself, right?
Yeah, no, not really.
Yeah. I tried. You try to practice an Aikido technique, and you sort of like spin around for a little bit, and then you're like, I guess I threw.
Doesn't feel right
Um,
somehow. Yeah.
so if you're thinking even like trying to make links between something like mirror neurons and empathy and bodies, like I remain skeptical, and I think we're all sort of living an experiment right now about like whether, like, you and I are connecting right now, but also it's not like when we were standing in person, right? Some of that psychological, some of that I have to say is physiological, right? I can't smell you right now,
Mm.
even if you don't have like an odor, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
stuff between us.
Okay.
So for a martial art like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, um, just watching someone do that is certainly not the same. And yeah, that kind of mourning is definitely a
Mm.
physiological response. A bunch of the high-ranking black belts in my instructor's school, we did a couple like seminars together, and nobody really seemed to be into the actual Kempo part. We all just kind of wanted to see each other, and
Yeah,
then we would all just kind of be sad, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
someone would get up and demonstrate a technique, we half or 75% of the people would just kind of sit there and watch them, and we'd all sort of be like, yeah, that seems like a fun thing we could do when we were actually together.
So let's talk a little bit more about clothing then, because
Yeah.
a lot of your research is about clothing, and you've researched all the way back to clothing and Bartitsu
Mhm.
and contemporary clothing. Um, and I guess, I mean, one of the things that's relatively well known about Bartitsu, if people have read sort of like Emmeline Godfrey's work on Bartitsu,
Yeah.
which I would imagine many people have, is that it was a very much a Victorian genteel response to fears about crime or about
Yeah.
colonial crime or working class crime or immigrant crime, like in Irish in London or whatever, and that a large part of it involved not just fighting like a ruffian, but fighting like a gentleman, say, or
Mhm.
then
Mhm.
subsequently, I guess, maybe like a lady. Um, and you have connected clothing with that. What's your argument about Victorian Bartitsu and clothing?
There's a really interesting dialectic within Bartitsu, and I think it has to do, much like with Ed Parker, with like Barton Wright trying to sell it. So there's this semiotic element of it where he's sort of intentionally making choices, and then there's an affective component as well. So the semiotic component of it is trying to sort of sell the authenticity. It's Japanism.
Mm.
So in his earlier articles, especially I believe in his first one, he's got pictures of himself training with someone in Japan, and they're both wearing their gi. I think his instructor's also wearing a hakama. Um, and to me, that really signals like a semiotic choice to say like, hey, here's this non-British thing. I have access to this particular knowledge that you do not have.
Mm.
But then the second article in Pearson's is all in sort of upper middle Victorian outfits, which also seems like a semiotic choice that says this is not only is this foreign knowledge that I have access to that's something that's special, but it's also not just for the theater.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
I hadn't uh, hadn't noticed, and maybe there's some work to be done here, whether he dresses his opponents as sort of ruffians or in more
Mm.
particularly Irish clothing or anything. Nothing jumped out to me, but there's something to be said there as well. But I think the affect component of it that I got really interested in is the way that it changes that standard upper middle class suit into a martial arts uniform, right? Where we were just talking about how, like there's every once in a while, maybe not for you, I'm a little bit scatterbrained. I would show up to teach Kempo at the university and be wearing like, oh shit, I forgot. Oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear. Oh shoot, I forgot my gi pants. So now I'm just gonna wear like my gi jacket and then my like suit pants, or vice versa. And that always felt really awful, not just physically because it's not fitted the same way, but also just sort of psychologically. But if all we did was train in our suits, then like any moment I'm also wearing my martial arts uniform, right? I can start telling you about Charles Dickens, and then if an Irish ruffian breaks into the classroom, I could also fight him because I'm ready to go.
Mm. That's
So yeah,
yeah. No.
no,
Well, I just think I was when I was invited to Japan a while ago, and I was shown around by Mike Molaski, who and he laid on a tour for me. And he took me around all of these different styles of martial arts clubs. All these people who I didn't get their names, or I did get their names, but I didn't go in. And this one guy was amazing. He wouldn't let me take a photograph of him. He wouldn't let me film anything. Couldn't really speak English, but we had a three-way conversation.
yeah.
And he has studied the history of different styles of swordsmanship, and he argued that the further you go back historically, the more that Chinese and Japanese styles look the same. And the real shift is to do with changes in the clothing worn by Japanese swords people, so they could no longer, they wouldn't be bending at the waist as much. So the classical kind of Chinese position where they might be leaning forward and one hand comes up, one hand. You stop seeing that because they couldn't lean because of the nature of the belts and the waistlines of their. And at that point, and these codes of movement and codes of behavior where it's just undignified to bend forward. So you just stay vertical, and you're wearing clothes that don't allow you to. So I'm thinking, if we connect that, I mean, interested to hear what you think about that, but also if we connect that back to, let's go and do Kempo in a suit that we would wear to commute, urban, teach middle class stuff. I mean, that's going to change the Kempo, because you can't move in the same way without destroying your clothing, right?
Right. Yeah. So Aikido is what got to start with where you began. Aikido is what got me started thinking about this, because you wear that kushita in your hakama that basically prevents you from bending over comfortably or from leaning back comfortably. And so one reason why all the black belts have great posture is, of course, that they're all amazing martial artists. But the other reason is that they have a piece of wood shoved up their butt, basically. So, I don't think you could throw someone and then grapple them, right? In the same way that you have to end with that sort of very upright posture, controlling from standing, because you've got this piece of wood that prevents you from bending. So that's such a fascinating argument about the divergence between Chinese and Japanese.
Yeah, I'll look into that. I'll find out I'll ask Mike Molaski who that guy was. He was great. He's a really nice guy. The other thing, I mean, I once studied I downloaded a load. Hang on. I don't want to say anything illegal. No, let's just say I had access to some an online course, and now I'm not going to name the martial art, but because I had access to a self-defense course that I'm not going to name, and they insisted that you always train in the clothes that you wear on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So I tried to do that. And what happened was I ended up with very few of the clothes that because like you go down on your knees, you're up, you grapple with someone, it just destroys your clothes. So Absolutely. It either means you have to change the clothes that you wear on a day-to-day basis, or you just can't do that.
Yeah. And this is I think, like, now we're back to the crux of my argument, that like uh, they would occasionally do days in the park in Kempo, and he would say like, where would you usually wear? I love head kicks. I have a black belt in Taekwondo as well. I'll stand up for a second, but like I'm also a hipster. I wear super tight pants. I could not kick anyone in the head with these pants, right? I would have to. I've always said my first self-defense move is just going to be to pull my pants off, so that I can. If they still want to fight after
Probably
that,
all you need. That's
I
all you
think
need.
so. Yeah. And so if that is the case, I like you just said, but I'm going to sort of just present it slightly differently. I have to either decide, do I do Kempo and Taekwondo for self-defense,
Mhm.
or do I do it for other reasons? And if I do it for self-defense, I've got to change how I practice it and change what I do because of what I wear all the time, right? All of my suits are also, I get them all from Express. I always look like
Mm.
I can barely move because my clothes are so tight. And so if it's really about self-defense, I need to learn how to do 5 swords in an outfit that's like trying to show off as much of my pecs and arms as I possibly can, right? And if it's not the case, if I say, no, I don't want to destroy all of my clothing, and no, I feel like it restricts my movement and I don't like practicing it, then I need to admit to myself that at least part of my practice is
Yeah.
the joy of movement, right? Or is the
Yeah.
joy of that community and moving in that community.
Yeah.
Uh, and not just, and now we're back to Bartitsu, not just knowing that like at any moment you might be attacked, to quote the Bartitsu manual, right?
Yeah. Yeah. See, I won't buy clothes that I can't move properly. Shirts, okay, like
Yeah,
because there's compromises there,
yeah,
but I will not buy trousers, jeans, anything like that unless I can. And my wife's always like, I try something on, and I come out the change room, I'm lifting my leg up, and she's going, "But
yeah,
you don't need to do that." But my response is, "But my body can do that. What happens if I want to run up 3 or 4 stairs at a time?
yeah,
I will not wear trousers that do not allow me to move my legs to the extent that my legs want to move on a day-to-day basis." And
yeah,
also, I mean, there are some trousers that meet that criterion, but in the morning, if I think I might do Tai Chi today, where I don't need to wear specific clothing, I won't wear those because for Tai
hmm.
Chi, there are some long poses and low poses. There are some stretches. There are some kicks. So even if I'm wearing relatively tight, if I have relatively tight trousers, because I just don't want to do Tai Chi in them. I want the free. I don't want to wear flowing silk pajamas. Actually,
Sure,
maybe I do,
yeah,
but so there's it's interesting the way that the clothes really, there's a huge influence that we just don't talk about. We just,
yeah,
inside and outside of training hall, the clothes are working on what we can do, what we want to do, what we feel we can't do. It's amazing, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. And I love that. But my body can do that. That's such a good response, and that's Deleuze who says like affect is about what a body can do,
Yeah.
and yeah, my body. I had the joy of doing a summer class in London last summer, and it was 3 weeks of no martial arts except the one time we went to the Bartitsu school in a small city whose name I cannot remember, and now I wanted to like give them a
Just
shout out.
outside of London. No, that doesn't matter. There are a few. There are a few in
Yeah,
north and
they were
south.
great.
Yeah.
Um, but like my body can do things that it wasn't doing for like a month, and I was losing my mind, and I thought nobody was looking at me from my group. At least it's London, everyone's always looking at you. And so I just front kicked we were on the escalator going down into the tube, and there was something over my head, so I just kicked up and hit it, and everyone sort of looking around at me, and I was like, it's a thing my body can do. I'm not trying to show off. My body is just like, your foot has been below your waist for like 4 weeks. What are you going to do?
Too long. It's been too
Yeah,
long.
yeah,
Yeah, that is a funny thing. Skill acquisition and skill loss. Um, and because I've I think I wouldn't stop doing Tai Chi because I would feel so angry at myself if I forgot the form.
mhm,
I've thrown a lot of stuff away. Like there's a lot of stuff that I can't do anymore. I used to
yeah,
love all the taekwondo and the high kick in it, and I still can kick high, but yeah, I mean skill acquisition and skill loss. it's a different type of conversation,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah, yeah.
it?
I was also gonna say that I like kind of the last thing I was thinking about before I had to like really deep dive into my Charles Dickens, etc. manuscript, but I want to come back eventually, is that kind of communal belonging element. You were talking about jujitsu and that sort of bereavement. Um, and then something that you just said, and couldn't tell you what, triggered the sense that like, I don't think, even as we're talking about like practicing one martial art in another martial arts uniform, I'll speak for myself at least, I would not show up to my Aikido dojo in my black Kempo gi.
Okay.
Um, because of the kind of communal belonging aspect, right? It would be saying you could show up and have to wear your buttoned up shirt because you forgot your gi top, but to show up in like and have deliberately brought the black uniform, which you don't wear in Aikido, to a different martial art would to me be saying like it sort of separates you from that community. So there's something about, and I think that's like the best example I can think of that dialectic between semiotics and affect that says like it's sending a message that says I don't care about your dress rules or I don't want to belong to that uniformity that is brought around by the uniform. But it's also affective that says like my body doesn't belong with your bodies, or it belongs differently, or it stands out.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think I see that. I wouldn't turn up to a Brazilian. Well, yeah. So like I was trained in Gracie bar, so I had my in a Gracie bar gi. It looks like a racing car. It's so branded. It's just
Yeah, yeah.
literally stamps all over it, and it's like. And I used to think they were so ugly until I started, and I'm so
Sure.
proud to be putting this gi on. But in jiu-jitsu, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you can train in any gym anywhere, any club anywhere. And I used to train in clubs that weren't Gracie, and I would never wear that because it's just like I don't know. It's just like it's asking for trouble. So
Yeah, yeah.
I would wear an innocuous, unbranded judo gi,
Hmm.
or no gi, but I wouldn't have the Gracie thing on. Definitely
Yeah.
not. Because yes, some contexts are really determined. The structure of the uniform or the power of the uniform is significant, isn't it? And other ones though less so.
I think it really depends on the martial art too, right? I'm thinking Aikido, I wouldn't show up because Aikido is so regimented and careful in its practices. Whereas I think you could show up to, you could show up to a Kempo dojo in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gi that said Gracie, and people would be like, if you can hit, that's fine, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but then there's, sorry, go ahead.
No, I shouldn't have said that. I just said interesting. So
Oh, okay. um, and if I like to try to grab something that I feel like people can get a little more easily in their body before you then go to something more maybe weird, like could you wear the wrong gi? When I go train in a martial arts in a martial art that I don't have rank in, I always wear my white belt, right? Because
yeah.
it seems polite, and so that to me is of the same kind, right? You don't show up in your ratty old black belt in a martial art you've never done before because you're not saying like, trust me, I already know this. In the same way that you don't show up to a school in the Gracie uniform if it's not Gracie, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess I haven't asked about the connection between you're interested in literature and the novel and publishing and clothing, and then the affective dimensions of that. I mean, tell us about what you do when you study literature,
Yeah.
thinking about clothing and thinking about affect and so on. How does that work?
So the last chapter of my manuscript is about like relatively not read novelist named Walter Besant, who is quite popular as a philosopher and social thinker. So he writes this novel about it's called Children of Gibeon, about a wealthy heiress who goes. She finds out, it's Victorian, so I could describe the plot to you, but it would take 20 minutes.
Mm.
She finds out that she's actually working class. Plot twist, she's not. She's twins with some, it doesn't matter. So, so she goes to live with these seamstresses, and she wants to help them because she's a good Victorian. And my argument about that book is that like part of her journey is to learn that she can't help them if she's not wearing their clothes. And you know, they're seamstresses, so they're making clothes as well, but they can't wear those clothes. They can't afford to wear the outfits that they make. And so there's so much of like this Victorian message that you want to help people help themselves, that very liberal idea, right? Rests on clothing. You have to inhabit their space to figure out what they need, and you can't inhabit their space unless you're wearing their clothing. And then by putting on their clothing, you can sort of take on their bodies, both because you can think of yourself and how that affects you, but also because everyone else is now going to sort of read your body, both semiotically and affectively, as a worker's body. So this main character, by wearing the seamstress's clothing, sort of comes to understand what they need. And then she tries at one point, this is like my favorite part, she tries to like dress up her sister to get a better job. And what ends up happening is that she loses her job because she's suddenly like above her position, right? And this is the moment where the main character realizes, oh, it's not, you can't just put on new clothes and suddenly you're a new person. It's all about body change and the sort of social connection around. So whether it's on purpose or not, Besant has this really dense, complicated theory of clothing that's both semiotic and affective, and about the sort of requirements for empathy and how clothes are a sort of second skin. So if we're talking about empathy as a thing that is between bodies, it's also kind of between clothes.
Interesting. As you were saying that, I was thinking about the way in which you start to put a uniform on, or you put a suit on, or a style of dress, and you feel, the first time you do it, it feels like fancy dress. It feels ridiculous. First time you put on a gi, first time you put on a suit to go to a wedding or something like that, it feels ridiculous. But after a while, it feels normal, and it feels like you. And also, people they don't know that it's not you. It is you. It's like, so
Right.
I remember I got a job, my first or second academic job, and I went for the interview, and I had my suit on, and I got the job. And then when 3 months later, or whenever, I turned up on my first day of work, and I was just wearing a t-shirt, and shortly after that, my new boss, my new head of department or head of school or whatever, she said, "Well, you had us all fooled, didn't you?" And I was like, "What?" And she went, "Well, you turned up with a suit on." And I was like, "Well, it was an interview." It's like, it's not actually my skin. It's just like, and now it's a hot summer's day. I'm not, it's interesting. It becomes you. You become it. You become these things.
Yeah, I mean, I tie my obi better than I tie my shoes, right? Like that's much more who I am.
So if we were to look around and find some of the writings of Peter Katz, where would be the best place for us to go? Where would, if we're especially martial arts people, I mean, where would we go?
My first article, I think, is like where I would say like start there. I don't have a ton of publications. I'm pretty young yet. But in, oh dear, Victorian Literature and Culture, all the Victorian journal, there's like the Journal of Victorian Culture, Victorian Literature and Culture, the Journal of Victoria, so they're all the same name. But Victorian Literature and Culture, Staging the Streets is the name of the article, and that's my Bartitsu article. That was my my first publication. Has nothing to do with literature. It was just, I found this weird feeling in my body while I was doing Aikido in a Kenpo uniform, and I was like, what is up with this? I was in a class on Victorian dress studies, and then I found Bartitsu, and everything kind of came together. So that's my really like core martial arts.
And then what's next? I mean, what's next? What's the next thing we can look out for? You're going to submit something to martial arts studies, or?
Oh yes. So I've been working, finishing up my monograph, which has nothing to do with martial arts, but is that Besant chapter. But my next, I would really like to get together, after that conference. There were so many people who were talking about affect, either on purpose or without using those words, at least. I would really love to get together some sort of collection on martial arts and affect, and been working with Donovan Schaefer, who's he, in my opinion, is one of the leading affect scholars in religion studies. He's the one who got me into Aikido in graduate school, and he and I have always threatened to joint write a book on martial arts and affect, so I'm holding him to that. Thinking about the different ways that we in my head, I would love to organize it around different affects. So here's your chapter on joy in the martial arts. Here's your chapter on anger in the martial arts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, that would be excellent. That would be
yeah,
brilliant collection.
yeah,
Definitely, definitely, definitely. You gotta chase your dreams. You gotta do that, and then we can read
yeah.
it, and it'll be fabulous.
Thank you.
Okay, so Peter, we've talked for a long time, so I'm going to say thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. It's been really interesting, and
It was great.
we'll have to talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.